Hello, noble ones. Welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking. So today I want to have a little bit of a macabre topic, so I hope you don't mind that. But I do want to discuss, once again, Charlie Kirk's murderer. So we're discussing the assassin. I'm not going to give the name. I'd like to forget about him and just remember the man that was the victim in the situation. But I did have a small poll on my Twitter/X account. And if you aren't following, you absolutely should, because first, we went from 20,000 followers to 42,000 in a matter of weeks. Second, I post like a maniac. Third, I'll make it worthwhile. I promise. It's great. And I'm absolutely on fire calling out all the nonsense that has been happening lately. So anyways, including Dylan Mulvaney, what an imbecile. And I'll also show you cool things. All right, so I had this poll, and I said, this is a genuine question. What do you think is the most apt punishment for Charlie Kirk's shooter? And I gave two options: life in prison, death penalty. And as you can see, 8,542 votes later, the final result, this was run for about 24, not for exactly 24 hours, we have life in prison was chosen by 22.1% of the people, and death penalty was chosen by 77.9%. And of course, there are also 431 comments. I could spend the next 4 hours reading the comments, and I might read a few, but it is quite clear that at least the majority of people who follow me on X, and perhaps people that joined in, didn't follow, but still decided to give their opinion, as this was, 33,000, it's still kind of small range. Some other tweets of mine had a much larger impact, I suppose. But yeah, still, it could be that some people were from outside the community. Still, it kind of shows that I believe that there is an overwhelming perception due to a strong sense of indignation, and in fact, righteous indignation that occurred due to the fact that this man took Charlie Kirk's life unjustly, and so people think death penalty. Now, I would like to make this broader and talk about it with you. What do you think is the appropriate punishment for Charlie Kirk's assassin? Because, of course, we have to think about this not only philosophically, not only religiously, not only morally, if whatever type of morality you have, whether it be based on religion or whether it be based on your own inner perception of morality, perhaps at a species level. We can look at this from the perspective of the legal system and whatever you want. But really, as we assess this, the first thing we need to discuss is what other options do we have? Because, of course, you can't let someone like that go. Absolutely not. Because you don't know he's going to do it again. I mean, you don't know that for sure, but are you willing to risk? And if you say, yeah, I'm willing to risk, well, what about the next victim is your daughter or your son or your husband or you? So no, absolutely, letting them out is not an option. And therefore, we are left with these other two: life in prison and death penalty. Now, I think the reason why a lot of people are choosing death penalty is, of course, because they are angry. They are really angry that this individual did what he did. It was a horrible thing. And I myself was extremely angry when I saw the videos that showed what happened to Charlie. Given that video shocked me and made me first. Then it got me really angry. But what snapped me, what turned me into this crusade that I'm going on with the content that I'm making, was watching after that the clip of Charlie Kirk's little girl running towards him to hug him. That's what was the final straw for me, just to be clear. Together with the hundreds of thousands of people that laughed, but we already discussed it. Now, I'm interested to see what you guys think in the comments, so please let me know what you think is the best option here. And please give us a reason why. Because for this video, as we do our assessment and analysis, I would like to really look at the pros and cons and reasons for why life in prison would be the better option and reasons for why death penalty would be the best option. And as we review that, there is one more thing that I want to see. And in fact, we're going to start with that. We're going to see what Charlie Kirk thought about death penalty, specifically in the context of his murder. Yeah. I chose my words accurately in this case. Accurately. Did I get your attention? Watch.
If someone were to murder Alex or murder me, they already murdered themselves in that action. They already bestowed the punishment upon themselves. We are simply completing the task. When you take another person's life, you already took your own life.
I have concerns over things like the death penalty. Is it, it's one of the 10 Commandments. You said not murder. So is it somehow justified because they're such a horrible criminal, or are they eliminating or changing the trajectory of God's plan for what it was supposed to be because they murdered somebody and they didn't go when God was ready for them.
Great question. So I get this question a lot. So it does say do not murder. It does not say do not kill. Mm-hmm. So those are two different Hebrew words.
Yeah.
Right? So to murder is a completely different thing than to kill. For example, you're allowed to kill in self-defense.
Yes.
Somebody comes into your house, you are allowed to take that life if your life is being put into jeopardy. In fact, to go a step further, the reason why it made sense to ancient Israel, did you know that a life for a life, otherwise known as the death penalty, is the only law that is in all 5 books of the Torah? It's the only law. Not even the Sabbath is in all 5 books of the Torah. Now, the Sabbath exists in Genesis, but it's not in all 5 books. So this idea of taking a life if you take a life, what is it rooted in? Why does it matter? Well, first of all, God is communicating to us the first thing. Taking human life is a major deal.
Yeah.
That's God's first moral teaching in the Torah, that it's not to be trivialized. Let me give you another example. There's a law of the 613 laws of Judaism, of which we are not bound to the ceremonial law, which is one of them, that if an animal takes a human life, you must kill that animal. Okay, so it's like, okay, that's like, why do that? Well, what are you going to have, oh yeah, that's Lenny, he killed my uncle, and say hi. Like, you're going to keep that animal around? The only punishment imaginable for taking the thing that only we are made in the image of God. So if you take another image bearer's life, what could possibly be a just punishment for that? Well, according to the economy of God, it's that your life must also be taken. And according to scriptural theology, we are not taking that person's life. When you take another person's life, you already took your own life. I want you to think about that. If someone were to murder Alex or murder me, they already murdered themselves in that action. They already bestowed the punishment upon themselves. We are simply completing the task. And think about it. Some people will say, but Charlie, it's not fair because of whatever sob story liberal reason. How is it, and honestly, no, and I'll just close with it. I'll kind of finish with this. But you know who it's not fair to? It's not fair to the victims. You are cheapening the lives of the victims. You are basically saying the victims die and you get to live. So you get to continue to live even though you took the lives of others. So for example, I think it's fundamentally wrong that creep who killed those 4 college kids in Moscow, Iowa, that he gets to keep living. So he kills 4 college kids and he keeps on getting to have life, and those people don't. In order to say that those people's lives mattered, the only just thing that we can reason ourselves to is to take that person's life. And that is not murder, that is killing, and it's societal self-defense.
Okay, so I think now we know exactly how Charlie Kirk feels about, at least felt when he was alive. We don't know if he changed his mind now that he's beyond the veil. As a Christian, I do believe that he still lives. In fact, and that he is in the presence of our Lord. If you don't believe that, I respect it. I just ask you to be civil about it. If you appreciate my content so far and wish to help ensure my ability to continue to tell it how it is, regardless of any possible backlash, please support this channel on Patreon. Any support helps me and my team of academics keep the channel strong and gives us the means to fight back against the political rewriting of history. Stand with us, form the wall, defend the truth. But definitely when he was alive, this was his position. So, whether we agree or disagree, both at a scriptural level, at a moral level, at an intellectual level, and at a philosophical level, I think it's interesting what he said at the end. He said it's societal self-defense. And this kind of connects to what I was saying before. Well, certainly, we cannot have the option of, letting them go. So that's not a thing, because we need to defend ourselves and the weak and the people that can't defend themselves and the possible future victims. However, it stands to reason to discuss it stands to reason to also discuss the possibility of stopping these shooters. Is taking them out the only way we can defend ourselves? And of course, this kind of connects to when sometimes mass shooters get neutralized. What I mean by that is I'm talking about active shooters. So you have an active shooter in an incident, he's shooting, then either the police or firearm owning citizens defend themselves, or the authorities take the shooter down, right? This is what happened during the shooting that occurred at the Tennessee school, where the disgusting individual that went inside the school and targeted specifically the Christian children, unfortunately claiming a few victims, but then the authorities arrived and they took the shooter out. So yeah, they are killing the shooter, but they have to do it because it's a form of societal self-defense. And it is our duty, in fact, to take out an active shooter in a situation like that if you are in a position to do so. Of course, for the authorities, that's easier than for civilians because, well, they have all the gear and they have all the stuff that they need. But then again, some civilians oftentimes do that. And I think that it's a great thing that they do it. Very courageous of them. So already the idea of killing a shooter like this is something we accept, at least during an active shooting event. Now, if the shooter surrenders and is not a threat anymore, then we arrest them. We don't just take a firearm and execute them, because there has to be a due process within the legal system. But if the threat hasn't been neutralized, or if you are uncertain, usually law enforcement will take the shooter down, which is absolutely the correct and moral thing to do. So having clear that, what do we do when the shooter is in prison? So if you put the shooter in prison for the rest of their lives, because it has to be life in prison without possibility of parole, on one hand, for some of these shooters, that's worse because they oftentimes turn their firearm on themselves. Oftentimes they want to die because they're cowards and they don't want to go through the living hell that spending their lives in prison is going to be. So on one hand, if you do that, depending on the person, this might be a worse punishment, because eventually they are going to die anyways. But after, imagine that someone who's in their 20s, they're going to spend, another 60 years in prison in that hell. So there is that. However, some people complain about the fact that it's still taxpayer dollar that feeds them, right? And keeps the lights on, I guess, in their cell. I mean, at the end of the day, a single shooter, I don't think is going to cost that much to the individual taxpayer. But I do understand, what are we talking, cents from what we pay in taxes? But of course, it still is taken from a collective fund that comes from hard-worked money. And so I can understand, absolutely, it's a fair position to have when you say, no, it doesn't matter the amount. I think that's not the right way to use the money. That could be used for something else. So that's one point to consider. Now let's move to the death penalty. A positive thing of the death penalty is that you are ensuring that the threat is neutralized forever. What I mean by that is that even though it's extremely rare, and I think these days it's even rarer due to the security that prisons have, but I mean, sometimes criminals do escape. So this is all, even though we're talking about extremely low percentages, if that happens and one of these mass shooters, criminals, does manage to escape, something goes wrong, whatever it is, then once again, if they claim a victim, we could have prevented that through death penalty. Now, of course, death penalty should be reserved to the worst cases. However, that is something that you have to consider. And once again, I think oftentimes when we think of this, we think of the statistics. So we're like, yeah, but they're right, but it doesn't happen that often. It happens extremely rare. Right, but it still happens. And when it does happen, yeah, what are the chances? Who's the victim? What are the chances the victim is going to be someone close to you? And yet, someone who is saying this had the exact experience that I just described. Simply because it's statistically extremely unlikely that it will happen to you watching this, it was also statistically improbable that it happened to the person that it did end up happening to. And so even though mathematically you could feel, oh yeah, but it's not going to happen to me. And then again, it kind of shows a lack of empathy and compassion in that case, because you should care about other people as well, even if you're not directly affected. Still, someone will maybe. And so if that happens, and then you're really unlucky with the numbers, and it's going to be your son that is the victim, would at that point your idea of being against the concept of death penalty change? And if the answer is, well, yeah, after my son died, I'm like, I wish that guy was put down, then you see that there is a little bit of a hypocrisy there. And how many people in a situation like that could really say, no, I'm glad that they didn't do the death penalty for this monster, who just took the life of my son. And that's why we need to really be honest about this discussion. I'm personally a little bit split. In fact, I'm just trying to assess this and report, and then I want to see what you think, because I'm conflicted. On one hand, I don't like the idea of the death penalty. But on the other hand, I think of all these other scenarios, and I'm thinking, is life in prison that much more humane anyways? It's my first situation. And then the other one is, what if? What if? Because in the worst scenarios, imagine someone that goes into a school, elementary school, and shoots children. There is no repairing that. We need to create a barrier between us and them. And if this barrier was completely impenetrable, 100%, zero possibilities, one thing. But it does happen sometimes that some of these, I mean, think about Irina. The criminal was let loose, and then she died because of it. He belonged in prison, for sure. I'm not saying death penalty to him before, after. So that's the thing. I'm a little split. I don't know. On one hand, I think, yeah, death penalty, take him out, because we need to defend ourselves from people like this. But on the other hand, I'm like, but what would life in prison work in this case? And I'm conflicted. So that's why I would like to know what you guys think. And the last question I have for you is, now that you know what Charlie thought about this, is that going to have an influence to what you think is the correct choice here? Once again, let me know in the comments. As always, thank you very much. Please be respectful in the comments. I'm looking forward to learn from you. Bye.